So as you can see here, we have the robot, which is the Rubik's Cube solver robot. This robot contains hardware and it also has a lot of software. For the body of the robot, the white parts are actually all the bodies has been 3D printed. So the body contains the legs, the arms, the basically camera holder and the board holder, and then also more importantly, it also has the rack and pinion gears inside to move the basically motors more forward and backward. So after we 3D print everything and we assemble the body of the robot, we then move to the next stage, which is basically assembling and connecting the electronics. For the electronics, what we have here is basically an Arduino, a Raspberry Pi, and then we have a controller here, and then we have 8 motors, servo motors, which basically moves forward and backward, and then actually allows the clouds to move 180 degrees. And then of course we need a Rubik's Cube to put in the middle to be solved. And then we have a lot of other wires to make the connections and make the thing working. So what happens when I run the code is that the camera, oh, I forgot to talk about the camera. So the camera is right here and it basically connected to the Raspberry Pi. So the camera is basically being controlled with the Raspberry Pi. When I run the code, what happens is that the claws and the arms would turn the cube to each of its side, and then they allow the camera to take picture of each side. Then the pictures would be saved inside a folder in the computer. And those pictures would be processed later by OpenCV, which allows us to recognize the colors on the cube. So OpenCV is basically an open source library which has functions and like variables and stuff that we can use to process the images and recognize the colors in the images. So after each color and each cube on each side of the cube has been recognized, then the output would be passed to the COSIMBA algorithm. What the COSIMBA algorithm is, it's an algorithm that basically gets an input, and then as an output, it gives back the required moves to solve the cube. So after passing through the colors that we got from OpenCV, the algorithm would work, and it's gonna return back the required moves to solve to solve the cube, and then the Arduino would send the PWM signals through the controller to the motors to make the required moves. So the reason that we are using the controller here is that we want to avoid burning the motors. So the controller basically has a capacitor that allows, that actually controls the amount of power that goes to the motors, and so we try to avoid burning the motors. So we can say that basically the brain of this operation is the Raspberry Pi, which does the color recognition, which does the algorithm to solve the cube, and the Arduino is basically the muscles and which does the heavy liftings, which basically controls the motors. So I can show you a demo of how the pictures of each side of the cube will be taken. As you can see, the pictures has been saved and it does recognize the colors. So we go for yellow, blue, white, orange. There's no green, and then red. And then we go to the other side. And then all these colors would be coded into a string that would be passed to the cosymbol algorithm. And then the algorithm would return back the required moves to solve the cube, which is going to be passed to the motors using the Arduino. And that's it for the cube solver. Thank you for listening.